On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft by Stephen King. Picture this scene for a moment. A young man is crammed into a trailer home with his wife and two small children. He teaches high school English, but the pay is laughable. During summer breaks, he works in an industrial laundry, washing motel sheets and restaurant tablecloths crawling with maggots. At night, he tries to write stories. He dreams of being a writer, but that dream feels impossibly distant. Rejection slips pile up. Bills pile up faster. One evening he starts a new story about a lonely, tormented high school girl who gets bullied in the shower. Strange idea, he doesn't even like the main character. After just 3 pages, he crumples them up in disgust and tosses them in the trash. Dead end. Later that night, his wife Tabitha is emptying the trash. She spots the crumpled paper balls and, for some reason, fishes them out. She smooths the pages, shakes off the cigarette ashes, and reads. A little while later, she finds him and says, "You've got something here. I really think you do." That young man was Stephen King. The story was Carrie. And that one simple act of faith, of someone pulling his discarded work out of the trash and believing in it, would launch one of the most successful literary careers in history and change their lives forever. The book we're exploring today isn't just another writing manual from a famous author. It's something far more personal and powerful. It has sold millions of copies, not because of the famous name on the cover, but because it's one of the most honest, practical, and deeply moving books ever written about the creative life. By the end of our journey today, you won't just learn how to write, you'll understand why we write. You'll see how the messy, painful, and beautiful parts of a life can be transformed into stories that matter. And you'll discover the single most important rule that separates those who dream of writing from those who actually do it. This is more than a manual. It's a memoir of the craft and a testament to the power of showing up. Let's begin. To understand how Stephen King writes, you first have to understand where he comes from. And his story doesn't start in a library or a classroom. It starts with imagination, pain, and a little bit of magic. His earliest memory is being 2.5 years old, pretending to be a circus strongman. He'd found a heavy cinder block in his uncle's garage and was carrying it across the floor, imagining he was in a spotlight, the star of the show. But a colony of wasps had built a nest inside it. One flew out and stung him on the ear with searing, brilliant pain. Startled, he dropped the cinder block right on his bare foot, mashing his toes. In that one moment, you see the seeds of a future storyteller, a vivid imagination immediately colliding with the shocking, unexpected pain of real life. His childhood was a landscape of constant moving from town to town, raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to support him and his older brother, David. For a time, they were looked after by a series of babysitters. One of them, a massive teenager he remembers as Eula Beulah, was both a source of laughter and terror. She would tickle him until he was breathless, and then, still laughing, smack him hard enough to knock him to the floor. She prepared him, he says, for the world of literary criticism. After having a 200-pound babysitter fart on your face, the Village Voice holds few terrors. These weren't just chaotic memories. They were the raw materials. King learned early on that life is not a neat, tidy story. It's often absurd, sometimes terrifying, and frequently both at the same time. He spent most of first grade sick in bed. It started with measles and led to bout after bout of throat infections and painful earaches. He remembers being taken to an ear specialist who, with a reassuring smile, spoke the lie every child fears: "This won't hurt." The doctor then slid a long needle into his ear and punctured his eardrum. "The pain," he says, "was beyond anything he has ever felt since. It happened 3 times. The first time he believed the doctor. The second time he believed him again, mostly. The third time he fought back, screaming and thrashing. It was a lesson he never forgot. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 3 times, shame on both of us." Pain, he learned, is a profound teacher. It demands to be felt and remembered. Great stories often come from that same place of unflinching honesty about what hurts. But it was his mother, Nellie Ruth King, who turned him from a boy who simply had stories in his head into a boy who wrote them down. During that year he was sick, he spent his time reading tons of comic books. He started by copying them word for word into a notebook, sometimes adding his own little descriptions. One day he showed his work to his mother. She smiled, but when he admitted he'd mostly copied it, he saw her disappointment. "Write one of your own, Stevie," she told him. "I bet you could do better. Write one of your own." He describes the feeling of that moment as immense possibility, as if he'd been led into a vast building filled with closed doors and told he could open any one he liked. So he did. He wrote a 4-page story about a team of magic animals, led by a big white rabbit named Mr. Rabbit Trick. When he gave it to his mother, she read it right there. She laughed in all the right places. And when she was done, she told him it was good enough to be in a book. "Nothing anyone has said to him since," he writes, "has ever made him happier." She paid him $25 for that story, and for the next 4 he wrote. That was the first dollar he ever made in the business. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was the belief. Someone had told him his stories were worth something. For a young person trying to find their way, that kind of validation is everything. His older brother Dave was another powerful force in his life. Dave was brilliant, restless, and always coming up with some wild scheme. One of his projects was Dave's super-duper electromagnet. He'd wrapped a metal spike in copper wire and, bypassing the weak battery suggested by a science book, decided to plug it directly into the wall outlet. His little brother Stevie's job? To be the test pilot and stick the plug in the socket. Steve hesitated, but his brother's manic enthusiasm was too much to resist. He plugged it in. The result wasn't magnetism. It was a massive power outage that blew out the electricity in their building and the building next door. As they watched the police and power company arrive, they were terrified. But they didn't get caught. And through these adventures, Steve was learning what makes a good story. High stakes, unpredictable outcomes, and characters you can't help but follow, even if they're leading you into trouble. As a teenager, he fell in love with movies, especially horror and science fiction flicks. He and his friend Chris would hitchhike 14 miles almost every weekend to the Ritz Theater, the place that showed the low-budget but strangely beautiful adaptations of Edgar Allan Poe stories. After seeing The Pit and the Pendulum, he had a grand idea. He would write a novelization of the movie, print it on his brother's old drum press, and sell it at school for $0.25. He ran off 40 copies and sold almost all of them in a single day. He was $9 richer and walking around in a daze of newfound wealth. Then, he was summoned to the principal's office. A teacher, Miss Hissler, held up a rolled-up copy of his book and asked him a question that would haunt him for years. "Why do you want to waste your abilities writing junk like this?" He was ashamed. And for a long time he carried that shame, the feeling that what he loved to write was somehow unworthy. It's a feeling many creative people face. The fear that what brings them joy is silly or a waste of time. He says it took him until he was 40 to realize that almost every writer who has ever published a line has been accused by someone of wasting their talent. If you create something, someone will try to make you feel lousy about it. That's all. The most useful writing lesson he ever got didn't come from a classroom. It came from a small-town newspaper editor named John Gould. After another stunt, creating a satirical newspaper called The Village Vomit got him into trouble, the school guided him toward a job writing sports for the local paper. He didn't know anything about sports, but Gould told him he'd learn. He turned in his first 2 articles. Gould read one, made a few small changes, and set it aside. Then he took a big black pen to the second one. The page was a sea of cross-outs, corrections, and scribbled notes. But when Gould was done, he looked at the young writer and said, "I only took out the bad parts. Most of it's pretty good." It was a revelation. Gould told him something that became a cornerstone of his process. When you write a story, you're telling yourself the story. When you rewrite, your main job is taking out all the things that are not the story. And then he gave him a formula that would change his life. Second draft equals first draft minus 10%. It was a simple, powerful rule. No matter what, you find a way to make the story tighter, faster, and more focused by cutting 10%. It taught him that writing isn't just about adding words. It's about the discipline of taking them away. This lesson came just in time, because life was about to get a lot harder. To save money for college, he took a job at Warumbo Mills, a dingy factory that felt like something out of a Dickens novel. He bagged loose fabric, and later, worked in the dye house. One day, a coworker told him about the rats they'd found in the basement during a cleanout. Rats as big as cats, some as big as dogs. Years later, that offhand comment would spark a story called Graveyard Shift, which he sold to Cavalier magazine for $200. It was the first real money he'd made from his junk. He was learning another crucial lesson. Your life is your material. Pay attention. Everything is copy. It was in college, working a summer job at the library, that he met Tabitha Spruce. He fell in love with her in a poetry workshop. In a time when many of his peers were writing vague, airy poems, believing that art came from some mystical uprush of feeling, Tabby's work was different. It was crafted. It was intelligent. It showed a work ethic. She understood that writing was not just about divine inspiration. It had as much in common with sweeping the floor as it did with moments of revelation. He put his hand on her calf as she spoke about her poem. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Sometimes, he says, these things are not accidents. After college, the reality of adult life hit hard. He couldn't find a teaching job, so he went back to the laundry, this time for even lower wages. He and Tabby were married, with 2 young kids, living in a series of shabby apartments. He kept writing, mostly for the men's magazines. Those stories, grim as they were his escape. They were the thin margin that kept his family off welfare. He remembers one day coming home with a sick, feverish daughter in his arms and no money for medicine, but sticking out of their mailbox was an envelope from Cavalier. Inside was a check for $500 for a story he never thought would sell. Suddenly, they could afford a doctor. They could afford dinner. That was the writing life then, a constant seesaw between desperation and sudden, miraculous relief. It was during this period, when he finally had a teaching job but was still broke, living in a trailer in a town he called the asshole of the world, that the idea for Carrie came to him. It was a combination of 2 unrelated things: a memory of the girls, locker room from a summer janitor job, and an article he'd read about telekinesis. He saw a scene, a girl getting her period for the first time in the shower, not knowing what it is, while the other girls, horrified and amused, throw tampons at her. She thinks she's dying, and she reacts. She fights back. But how? With her mind. He sat down and wrote 3 pages. And he hated it. He didn't like the main character, Carrie White. He felt like a stranger on planet Female, unable to connect with the all-girl cast. And he knew the story would have to be long to pay off, too long for the magazines he usually sold to. He couldn't see wasting a month on a story he didn't like and couldn't sell. So he threw it away. And this brings us back to that moment in the trailer, Tabitha, fishing the pages out of the trash, shaking off the ashes, reading them. And then saying those magic words. She wanted me to go on with it. She wanted to know the rest of the story. He told her he didn't know anything about high school girls. She said she'd help him with that part. "You've got something here," she said. "I really think you do." With her encouragement, he went back to it. He dug into his own memories of the 2 loneliest, most reviled girls from his high school. He remembered one, Sandra, who lived in a trailer, dominated by a life-sized crucified Jesus, her face a mask of timid misery. And another, Dodie, who wore the same worn-out clothes every single day. One day, Dodie came to school in a brand-new outfit, a soft wool sweater and a cranberry skirt. She was transformed, and her face showed that she knew it. But the other kids wouldn't let her escape the box they'd put her in. The teasing that day was worse than ever. By the end of it, her smile was gone, the light in her eyes extinguished. Both of those girls were dead by the time he wrote Carrie. He channeled their pain, their loneliness, and the casual cruelty they endured. He never got to like Carrie White, but he came to understand her. When the manuscript was finished, he sent it off to an editor at Doubleday. Then, he mostly forgot about it. Life went on. One afternoon, he got a call at the school where he taught. It was his wife. She would have had to bundle up the kids just to go use the neighbor's phone. He knew it was either very bad news or very good news. It was a telegram from his editor. It read, "Carrie officially a Doubleday book. Is $2,500 advance okay? The future lies ahead. Love, Bill. $2,500. It was a small advance, but to them, it felt like a fortune. That night, lying in bed, Tabby asked him how much they might make if it sold to a paperback publisher. He guessed, trying not to get their hopes up, somewhere between $10,000 and $60,000. $60,000? She asked, shocked. Is that much even possible? It was a night for dreaming. About a year later, on a Sunday afternoon, the phone rang again. It was his editor, Bill. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. He wasn't. "You might want to," Bill said. "The paperback rights to Carrie went to Signet Books for $400,000. He couldn't speak. He thought he must have misheard. 40,000? 400,000, Bill repeated. 200 of it's yours. Congratulations, Steve. The strength ran out of his legs, and he slid down to a sitting position in the doorway. He, a man whose family was living on a teacher's salary and the occasional check from a men's magazine, was suddenly rich. He went downtown to buy his wife a Mother's Day present, something wild and extravagant. The only store open was a drugstore. He bought her a hairdryer. When he told her the news, she just looked around their shabby little 4-room apartment, and then she began to cry. Success, however, brought its own darkness. King's story from here is one of grappling with fame and the immense pressure that comes with it. He turned to alcohol and then to drugs. For a decade, he was, in his own words, a ship's captain, in charge of a voyage to nowhere. He wrote some of his most famous books, like Cujo, in a blackout, with little memory of having written them at all. He says he was writing about monsters, but the real monster was addiction. Novels like Misery, about a writer held captive by his #1 fan, and The Tommyknockers, about aliens who give you energy and intelligence but steal your soul, were his subconscious screaming for help. Finally, Tabby intervened again. She gathered their family and friends and confronted him, dumping a trash bag full of beer cans, cocaine vials, and mouthwash bottles on the rug in front of him. She told him he had a choice: get help or get out. They loved him too much to watch him commit suicide. He bargained, he charmed, he did what addicts do. But in the end, he chose his family. He chose life. He was terrified he wouldn't be able to write sober, but he was willing to trade writing for watching his kids grow up. It turned out he didn't have to. The idea that you need substances to be creative, he says, is one of the great myths of our time. He got sober, and slowly, tentatively, he found the work again, and then he found the joy again. He had built his career behind a massive oak desk, placed in the center of a grand study. After he got sober, he got rid of it. He replaced it with a small, simple, handmade desk, and he put it in the corner. Life, he writes, isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. This whole journey, from the cinder block to the corner desk, is what informs his advice on writing. It's not theory. It's hard-won wisdom. He says that writing, at its heart, is a form of telepathy. It's the act of transferring a thought from your mind to the reader's mind, as intact as possible. He asks us to try it. Picture a table with a red cloth on it. On the table is a cage. Inside the cage is a white rabbit with a pink nose, munching on a carrot. On its back, in blue ink, is the number 8. Did you see it? Of course you did. That's the magic. And because it's magic, you must not come lightly to the blank page. To practice this magic, you need a toolbox. His is a simple one, built on the lessons he learned from his life. On the top layer are the two most essential tools, vocabulary and grammar. He's not talking about using big, fancy words. In fact, he warns against it. It's like dressing up a pet in evening clothes. The pet is embarrassed, and you should be too. The rule is simple. Use the first word that comes to your mind, if it is appropriate and colorful. Be plain and direct. Say, John stopped to take a dump, not John stopped to perform an act of excretion. The word is only a representation of the meaning. Don't make it worse by choosing a word that's only a cousin to the one you really wanted. Grammar, he says, isn't about naming parts. It's the pole you grab to get your thoughts up on their feet and walking. At its heart are just two things: nouns, which name, and verbs, which act. Rocks explode. Jane transmits. Mountains float. The simplicity is a safety net. He has two pet peeves here. First, avoid the passive voice. A timid writer says, "The meeting will be held at 7 o'clock." It sounds official, but it's weak. Be bold. Say, "The meeting's at 7. Don't write, "The rope was thrown by the writer." Write, "The writer threw the rope." Second, the adverb is not your friend. Adverbs, he says, are like dandelions on your lawn. One is pretty, but then there are 5, then 50, and then your lawn is covered in weeds. The road to hell is paved with adverbs. He's especially strict about them in dialogue attribution. Don't write, "Put it down," she shouted menacingly. The context of your story should show us she's menacing. Just write, "Put it down," she shouted. The best form of dialogue attribution is the simplest. He said, she said. To write adverbs is human, he jokes, but to write, he said, is divine. The next layer of the toolbox is about the bigger picture. The paragraph, not the sentence, is the basic unit of writing. It's the beat, the rhythm. You learn it by reading and writing until it becomes second nature. But the most radical tool in his box is what's missing: plot. He distrusts plot. Our lives are largely plotless, he argues, and plotting is incompatible with the spontaneity of real creation. For him, stories are not built. They are found. They are like fossils in the ground. The writer's job is not to construct a story, but to excavate it as carefully as possible, using the tools in the toolbox. Plot, he says, is a jackhammer. It's clumsy and destructive. It breaks as much as it liberates. It's the good writer's last resort, and the dullard's first choice. So if not plot, then what? The answer is situation. You put a group of characters into a predicament, and then watch them try to get free. Your job isn't to manipulate them, it's to watch what happens and write it down. The situation comes first, the characters come next. What if vampires invaded a small New England village? That's Salem's Lot. What if a young mother and her son were trapped in their stalled car by a rabid dog? That's Cujo. The story grows organically from that initial premise. The writer is not just the creator, but also the first reader, discovering the story as it unfolds. This brings us to description, dialogue, and character. For description, the key is to remember it begins in the writer's imagination, but should finish in the reader's. Don't give us a wardrobe inventory or a pimple-by-pimple rundown. Give us a few well-chosen details that stand for everything else. If you say Carrie White is a high school outcast with a bad complexion and a fashion victim wardrobe, we can fill in the rest. For dialogue, the key is honesty. You must pay attention to how real people talk, their rhythms, their slang, their hesitations, and you must tell the truth about it, even if that truth is ugly or profane. If a character would say "oh shit" when they hit their thumb with a hammer, you can't have them say "oh sugar" just because you're worried about offending someone. To do so is to break your contract with the reader, the promise to tell the truth. Character 2 comes from this same well of honesty. It's about paying attention to how people behave and telling the truth about what you see. And crucially, you must remember that in real life, no one sees themselves as the bad guy or the best friend. We each see ourselves as the main character. If you can bring that attitude to your fiction, your characters will come to life. Annie Wilkes in Misery may be a psychopath to us, but to herself, she's a hero, a beleaguered woman trying to survive in a hostile world. If you can make the reader understand her madness, even for a moment, she becomes terrifyingly real. All of this brings us to what he calls the Great Commandment, the one rule to rule them all. If you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. There is no shortcut. He reads 70 or 80 books a year, not to study, but because he loves it. He says every book has a lesson, and often, the bad books have more to teach than the good ones. Reading bad prose shows you what not to do. Reading good prose teaches you about style, character, and truth. You cannot hope to sweep someone else away with your writing until it has been done to you. Reading also creates an intimacy with the process. It pulls you into a place where you can write without self-consciousness. If you don't have time to read, he says bluntly, you don't have the time or the tools to write. And how much writing is a lot? He aims for 2,000 words a day, every day. Christmas, his birthday, the 4th of July. The work doesn't stop. Because for him, it's not work, it's inspired play. He tells a story about his son Owen, who wanted to play the saxophone like Clarence Clemens. They got him a Saxon lessons. But Owen only practiced during his scheduled times. As soon as the half hour was up, the horn went back in the case. There was no joy in it. It was all rehearsal. He contrasts this with true talent. When you find something you're talented at, you do it until your fingers bleed or your eyes are ready to fall out of your head. Even when no one is watching, every outing is a bravura performance, because you are happy. If the idea of writing for 4 to 6 hours a day seems strenuous, you might not have the aptitude for it. If it sounds like a dream come true, he says, consider this your permission slip. To do this work, you need a space, a room with a door, and you must be willing to shut it. The closed door tells the world, and yourself, that you mean business. Eliminate all distractions. No phone, no television, no video games. Your job is to make sure the muse knows where you're going to be every day. If he does, sooner or later, he'll start showing up. And this brings us, finally, to the last and perhaps most important part of his story. It's the part that ties everything together. It's about what happens when the writing stops, and life intervenes in the most brutal way imaginable. In the summer of 1999, he was halfway through writing this very book. One afternoon, he went for his daily 4-mile walk near his summer home in Maine. As he was walking up a steep hill on the shoulder of the road, a man in a blue Dodge van came over the crest. The driver, Brian Smith, was distracted, trying to keep his Rottweiler, Bullet, out of a cooler full of meat in the back seat. He wasn't looking at the road. He was on the shoulder. The van hit him. He was thrown 14 feet through the air. He woke up on the ground. His right leg was shattered in 9 places, so badly that the surgeon later described it as so many marbles in a sock. His hip was broken. His spine was chipped in 8 places. 4 ribs were broken, and his scalp was gashed to the bone. His lung collapsed. He was, in his own words, lying in death's doorway. He survived, after 5 marathon surgeries and months of excruciating pain. The recovery was a grim slog. He was confined to a wheelchair, and because of his shattered hip, sitting for more than 40 minutes was torture. The half-finished manuscript of On Writing sat on his desk. He didn't want to go back to it. How could he write about getting an agent when his world had shrunk to the next dose of pain medication? But he felt he had reached a crossroads. He had been in terrible situations before, and the writing had always helped him get through. It was a little act of faith, a spit in the eye of despair. It was Tabby, once again, who cast the deciding vote. He told her he thought he should try to go back to work. He expected a lecture. Instead, she just asked him where he wanted to set up. She rigged a table for him in the back hall of their house, a small space with just enough room for his computer, a printer, and a fan. That afternoon, she rolled him out to his makeshift desk and left him there to find out if he had anything left to say. That first session lasted an hour and 40 minutes. When it was over, he was dripping with sweat and nearly too exhausted to sit up. The pain was apocalyptic, and the first 500 words were uniquely terrifying. It was as if he'd never written before. He stepped from one word to the next, like an old man crossing a stream on wet stones. There was no inspiration that day, only stubborn determination. But the words started coming, a little faster, and then a little faster still. The pain began to seem a little farther away. The scariest moment, he writes, is always just before you start. After that, things can only get better. Writing did not save his life, he says. The doctor's skill and his wife's loving care did that. But it has continued to do what it always has done. It makes his life a brighter and more pleasant place. It was a way back to life. So, what do we take away from this incredible journey? The first thing that strikes you about On Writing is its profound, almost brutal honesty. This is not a book filled with lofty, academic theories about literary deconstruction. It's a book covered in the dust and dirt of real life. It smells of laundry steam, cheap beer, and hospital antiseptic. King doesn't present himself as a mystical genius communing with the heavens. He presents himself as a craftsman, a carpenter with a toolbox, who learned his trade through hard work, persistence, and paying attention to the world around him. The most powerful lesson, for me, isn't about adverbs or plot wheels. It's about the relationship between life and art. Your life, with all its messy, painful, embarrassing, and beautiful moments, is not something that gets in the way of your art. It is your art. The sting from a wasp, the cruelty of a babysitter, the shame of being told your work is junk, the joy of a first sale, the love for a partner who believes in you, the terror of addiction, the fight back from a near-fatal injury, all of it is material. The job of the writer is not to wait for a perfect, uninterrupted life. It's to take the life you have and tell the truth about it. This is why his advice is so practical and so liberating. The idea of the found fossil frees you from the tyranny of the perfect outline. It gives you permission to explore, to be surprised by your own story. The door shut, door open method of drafting gives you the freedom to be messy and imperfect in the beginning, and the discipline to be focused and critical later on. And the great commandment, read a lot and write a lot, is the ultimate anti-procrastination device. It tells you that the secret isn't waiting for inspiration. It's building a routine. So, how can you apply this right now? Here are just a few simple, practical ideas. First, find your corner. You don't need a fancy study. King wrote his first 2 novels in a laundry room. Find a space, no matter how small, and put a door on it, physically or metaphorically. Make it your sacred space, the place where you go to do the work. Second, commit to a small, daily goal. King does 2,000 words, but you don't have to. Start with 300 words. That's about 1 page, double-spaced. The point isn't the volume, it's the consistency. It's training the muse to know where you'll be, and showing up whether he does or not. And third, and maybe most importantly, give yourself permission. The end of this book is, as he says, a permission slip. A permission slip to write what you love, even if other people think it's junk. A permission slip to be a beginner, to be messy, to fail, and to try again. A permission slip to believe that your stories matter. Ultimately, King's message is one of profound hope. He didn't write for the money, or the fame, or to get dates. He did it for the buzz, for the pure joy of the thing. And if you can do it for joy, you can do it forever. He writes, writing isn't about making money, getting famous. In the end, it's about enriching the lives of those who will read your work, and enriching your own life as well. It's about getting up, getting well, and getting over. Getting happy, okay? Getting happy. That was our deep dive into On Writing by Stephen King. We've explored the major stories and the core lessons today. But I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you make the journey yourself. The true magic of this book is in King's voice, his humor, his humility, and his boundless generosity. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord with you, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning the craft. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see your own life and the stories waiting within it. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to continue exploring the world's most impactful books, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know we're on the right track and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together.